Hello, Mr. Allman here, and this is your Allman Cast on chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is one example of many types of chemicals known as pigments within plant cells and other photosynthetic organisms that's responsible for responding to light. Now, light is the ultimate source of energy for the process of photosynthesis. Light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. It comes in many forms, and one of the most common ways in which we measure light is based on its wavelength. That wavelength can be measured in terms of nanometers. Most of the light that comes from the sun is in a slice known as the visible light spectrum. The visible light spectrum we can measure in terms of the wavelengths of light from the violets, around 380 nanometers, up to the longer wavelengths in the red light range, up to 750 nanometers. There are slightly shorter wavelengths of ultraviolet light that also come from the sun, but those are not utilized by plants. Those wavelengths of light that have a shorter wavelength occur in a higher frequency, and therefore we say that they are higher energy. Those with longer wavelengths have lower energy. Now, chlorophyll is a pigment. Pigments are defined as molecules that interact with light to be able to produce a particular color. If we take a look here at the actual structure of chlorophyll, we can see that it is a fairly large complex molecule with all of these interlocking rings of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. It also has a large hydrocarbon tail, which is going to be hydrophobic. Chlorophyll is going to be embedded within the membrane of the chloroplast, and so we should expect to see some hydrophobic regions because of its placement there in the membrane. At the center of chlorophyll is an important magnesium ion, and that magnesium ion is going to be an important source for electrons, which will be utilized in the process of photosynthesis. Now, there are different forms of chlorophyll, and you can see in the box here one of the structural differences between chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, although most of this particular structure is actually the same. As we look at the space-filling model here, again, you can see the carbon in gray, the hydrogen in lighter gray. You can see the magnesium here in green, and the oxygen atoms on the side there in red. So chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are two forms of actually many different types of chlorophyll, which is only one form of the many photosynthetic pigments that are found in chloroplasts. Although chlorophylls A and B are primary photosynthetic pigments, there are many accessory pigments, and these additional pigments will respond to slightly different wavelengths of light, and those are going to allow the chloroplast to absorb a wider range of light that's coming from the sun. A couple ones that are important here are the carotenoids and the xanthophylls. And some of these accessory pigments are the ones that are responsible for allowing us to see the range of colors in leaves, because leaves tend to decompose and reabsorb the chlorophyll before the accessory pigments. Therefore, those fall colors that you see are actually the reveal of some of these accessory pigments present there in the leaf. Now, the greenness of plants actually comes from the fact that they primarily contain chlorophyll. This is an image of the chloroplast where photosynthesis takes place. As light hits the chlorophyll and the chloroplast in general, many of the wavelengths of light are going to be absorbed. Those that are absorbed will be utilized as a source of energy for photosynthesis. However, the wavelength of light that we perceive as green, that is going to be reflected and transmitted through. In other words, the green light from the sun is not being used by the plant. And if it's not being used, that is the type of light that's bouncing off of the plant cells and into our eyes. So we see green because green is the type of light from the sun that the plants cannot use. There are two important graphs that you should be familiar with that are closely related to each other, called the action spectrum and the absorption spectrum. So chloroplasts are going to absorb a lot of blue and red light, but not very much green. And the graph that I'll show you in a moment summarizes that. It shows the amount of light that is absorbed within the visible light spectrum. Now, each of that action spectrum can be broken down into many different absorption spectrums. And chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B and the xanthophylls and carotenoids and other accessory pigments each have their own absorption spectrum that shows what that one particular pigment is able to absorb. So if we look here, you can see the absorption spectrum here on the right. So as you look at light, which is going to contain all colors of light, as it shines through on the photosynthetic material, those pigments are going to absorb that light, and we can measure how much of that light is going to be absorbed. So at the top here, you can see each of these individual lines represents a separate absorption spectrum for each of the labeled photosynthetic pigments. So you can see that chlorophyll A is going to preferentially absorb this blue and purple light, as well as, particularly for chlorophyll A, red light. But a very low amount of light in the green and yellow bands are actually absorbed. Similarly, the carotenoids are going to absorb a lot of blue light and a little bit of green light, but it will not absorb at all any yellow or orange or red light. If you put all of these photosynthetic pigments together, if you combine together all of the individual pigments within the plant cell, you can get an action spectrum. And the action spectrum is going to show the total amount of light at different wavelengths that's absorbed. So combining them together, you see that nearly all of the purple and blue light is absorbed, very little of the green and yellow light, and most of the orange and a lot of the red light is going to be absorbed. As you go towards longer wavelengths, none of that additional light is going to be absorbed. So from this, we can see how it is not actually all forms of light, but the wavelength of light does make a difference in terms of whether or not a plant will be able to absorb it and use it for photosynthesis. That was your Almond Cast on chlorophyll. Thank you for watching.